distance. Shark attack in progress.
Where is she? I can't see her. The panicked cries ripped across Sunset Beach as red-stained water boiled beneath the surface. Onlookers pressed toward the shoreline, straining to glimpse the struggle. A massive shadow circled below, holding fast, refusing to let go. She's under there. Get the Coast Guard down here now. The chaos wasn't random. It was the outcome of warnings ignored, patterns dismissed, and decisions that valued profit over precaution. This was not the first time a lifeguard had paid with their life, and if the system remained unchanged, it would not be the last. What unfolded that afternoon was the culmination of years of oversight brushed aside. To understand why Ellen Shaw never resurfaced, we have to go back. It began as another postcard-perfect morning at Pacific Coast Beach Resort. Families set up umbrellas, children chased each other through the shallow surf, and the air carried the scent of sunscreen and salt. The water sparkled deceptively calm. No one could have guessed that hundreds of witnesses would soon watch in frozen silence as a predator emerged from the depths. For lifeguard Ellen Shaw, it would be her final shift. At just 26 years old, Ellen Shaw had already built a reputation larger than her age. She wasn't a seasonal hire looking for a summer tan. She was the head lifeguard, the one colleagues trusted most. Athletic, disciplined, and relentless about safety, she was the first on the beach each morning, scanning the waves for trouble before swimmers even arrived. And she was the last to leave, ensuring every piece of rescue gear was reset and ready. To her team, Ellen wasn't just a supervisor, she was the core of the patrol. She knew the regular swimmers by name, waved to the surfers at dawn, and memorized every shift in the tide. Her younger brother Jake later recalled, "She lived for that beach. Every night she'd talk about who she saved, which current caught someone, what near miss she'd prevented. She carried it all." Ellen's sense of duty bordered on obsession. Her connection to the Pacific was lifelong. Swimming since toddler years, surfing since 12. Certified by 18, her record spoke for itself. In only 3 summers of official service, she had pulled more than 40 people from life-threatening situations. Riptides, collapses, panicked tourists, she never lost one. But there was something she couldn't ignore, something no amount of training could control: the predators beneath. Ellen had noticed a change in recent seasons. Her daily logbooks became crowded with shark entries, at first nurse sharks and reef shark species that posed no serious danger. But then larger outlines appeared farther offshore, shapes that lingered, shadows that forced her to raise her binoculars and pause. In July 2023, her notes grew urgent. Large predators spotted 200 yards out cleared swimmers. Unusual feeding activity near North Jetty. Fish kills on shore, possible predator presence. These weren't just passing sightings, they were signals of a shift. Each time Ellen brought up her concerns in staff meetings, resort management brushed them off. Tourism dollars were pouring in, and shutting down the beach even briefly meant losing revenue. Her supervisor, Mark Peterson, told investigators later, "She was overly cautious. If we closed the beach every time she spotted something, we'd be out of business." The bottom line carried more weight than her instincts. But Ellen wasn't imagining things. At the same time, marine biologist Dr. Amanda Torres had been tracking shark movements up and down the coast. Her research, released only weeks before the tragedy, confirmed what Ellen suspected: a surge in great white shark activity. Torres warned of altered feeding patterns, closer approaches to shore, and higher aggression levels than in previous years. In other words, the ecosystem had changed. The risks were real. That summer, the Pacific carried an unusual heat. Water temperatures climbed higher than normal, and with it came changes beneath the surface. Dr. Amanda Torres explained, "When prey species are forced into shallower waters, their predators follow. Suddenly, great whites were appearing in zones where they hadn't been recorded in decades. It was a measurable shift, not speculation." Ellen read every page of Dr. Torres' study. She didn't just absorb the science, she acted on it. She printed copies of the research and tried handing them to fellow lifeguards, to resort supervisors, even to the board that managed beach operations. Most brushed it off as dry academia, disconnected from the sunny business of summer tourism. But Ellen trusted her instincts. Even on days when the water looked glass smooth and harmless, she said she felt a weight in her gut, a signal that something was changing. As August crept closer, her vigilance intensified. Ellen doubled her patrols, lengthened her sweeps, and pulled swimmers closer to the safety zone near the lifeguard towers. Teammates noticed. Some muttered that she was paranoid, spoiling the carefree vibe of the resort. Others quietly admitted respect for her sharp eye. Maria Santos, another lifeguard, recalled later, "She was different those last weeks, more tense, more locked in. She kept saying, 'Something's off. Don't let your guard down.' I wish we had listened harder." While Pacific Coast Beach Resort sold itself as a sanitized paradise, its glossy brochures left out a shadowed truth. The stretch of coastline carried an older name among locals, Blood Point. To outsiders, the name was harmless, a reference to iron-rich sand that turned the tide red during certain seasons. But to fishermen and longtime residents, the name carried a different weight. Captain Roberto Mendez, whose family had fished the same grounds for generations, described it plainly: "These waters have always been shark country. The deep channel runs too close to shore, pulling bait fish right under swimmers' feet. It's like a natural highway for predators." His grandfather and great-grandfather had taught him the same warning: stay alert in these waters or pay the price. The Maritime Museum kept records that backed up those warnings. In 1923, a fishing crew reported a massive great white tearing into their nets just off the shoreline where the resort now sits. In 1954, a local man vanished during an early morning swim, with witnesses describing violent splashing before silence. In 1987, a surfer survived an attack, but required over 200 stitches. The incidents were documented, but when developers broke ground in the early 2000s, none of those details made it into the environmental assessments. Public relations efforts rebranded the coastline into a family-friendly destination. Brochures boasted of calm surf and turquoise water. Charles Hamilton, the resort's developer, later defended the omissions. "Statistically, shark attacks are rare. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than bitten. We weren't going to let outdated folklore derail a world-class project." On paper, the logic seemed sound, but the ocean doesn't obey statistics. Marine science showed what locals already knew: the geography of the area made it a magnet for predators. The beach sat at the convergence of three current systems, generating nutrient-rich upwellings that drew in vast schools of fish. And nearby Salmon Creek created an additional hazard. Each spawning season, dying and injured salmon drifted into the surf, an irresistible signal to sharks that an easy meal awaited. Experienced surfers had their own unadvertised system of warnings. They knew to avoid the beach during salmon runs and certain tidal conditions, especially in late summer. Boards would stay racked, wetsuits left hanging, while outsiders played unknowingly in waters locals wouldn't touch. But resort guests never received those cautions. Tommy Mitchell, a veteran surfer, remembered being scolded by resort staff when he tried to warn tourists about shark activity. "They said we were scaring people, costing them business. But we weren't making this up." Everyone who grew up here knew the risks. The system favored denial over transparency. To those paying attention, the pattern of danger was clear. Every few years, an incident would break through the calm: an unsettling shadow, a sudden disappearance, or a close call with a shark. Each time, resort officials acted quickly, not to address the danger, but to downplay it. They increased marketing, polished safety statements, and reassured visitors that the beach remained one of the safest in California. By the summer of 2023, Pacific Coast Beach Resort had reached record attendance. More than 50,000 people visited the shoreline that year. From sunrise to sunset, the surf zone was crammed with swimmers, bodyboarders, and vacationing families. Statistically, the numbers alone guaranteed that risk would catch up with reality. Ellen Shaw's death wasn't random. It was the endpoint of a pattern ignored, the price paid by someone whose only mission was to protect lives. The ocean itself had been sending alerts all summer. In early July, resort maintenance crews began hauling dozens of dead fish off the sand each morning. Not minnows or bait fish, large predators like mackerel and tuna. Their bodies showed massive crescent-shaped bites, torn flesh stripped away. To guests, the mess was cleaned up before breakfast. To management, the explanation was simple, natural predation. But to scientists, it was evidence of something far more concerning. Marine biologist Dr. Patricia Williams examined several of the carcasses. Her analysis confirmed the tooth spacing matched that of a great white shark and not an average specimen. These marks suggested an animal over 20 feet long, a size rarely documented in these waters. Williams submitted her report to both local officials and the resort board. Neither acted. The report was quietly filed, its conclusions left to gather dust. Then the ecosystem itself began to change. Dolphins, normally a daily sight near swimmers, vanished. Harbor seals abandoned the offshore rocks where they had always gathered. Even seabirds altered their flight patterns, no longer diving into the nearshore waters for fish. Ellen documented every shift in her lifeguard reports. One entry read, "Unusual absence of marine activity, water visually clear but environmental behavior suggests predator presence, recommend heightened vigilance." But her supervisor, Mark Peterson, dismissed it. "Ellen sees problems everywhere," he later told investigators. "Fish die, animals move, it's nature. We can't shut the beach down every time something looks odd." By late July, Ellen wasn't the only one sounding alarms. Other lifeguards began noticing strange disturbances. Large shapes moved beneath the surface, too big to be dolphins moving with a purpose, too sharp to be whales. On one shift, lifeguard Carlos Rivera, stationed at the North Tower, spotted something that froze him in place. 200 yards out, just at the edge of the swim zone, this shadow, at least 20 feet long, cruising parallel to the beach, Rivera recalled. "I'd never seen anything like it." He reported the sighting immediately. The resort's response was, swift lifeguards were reminded that unconfirmed wildlife sightings must never be shared with guests, and spreading panic could result in disciplinary action. The clearest signal didn't come from a lifeguard, but from science. On August 10th, just 5 days before the attack, a group of marine biology students from the nearby university conducted a research dive offshore. Within minutes, they aborted the mission. Graduate student Emily Chen recalled, "The water was wrong. The visibility was fine, but it felt empty. Too empty. No fish, no movement, just this weight like something was out there." They surfaced early and immediately contacted their supervising professor, filing a detailed note of concern. It was one more red flag in a chain already stretching back decades. The marine biology students, who had been diving the area for months, sensed the shift instantly. "No fish, no sound, nothing," graduate student Emily Chen recalled. "It was like the ocean had emptied out, except for something we couldn't see." They surfaced after just 20 minutes shaken. Their professor, Dr. Michael Torres, recognized it immediately: a predator void. When a large apex predator moves into a hunting ground, everything else clears away. It is nature's survival instinct, the ocean's silent alarm. Dr. Torres wasted no time. He contacted the resort, directly reaching the general manager, with an urgent warning about the risks of keeping swimmers in the water. The response was calm, polite, and ultimately empty. The manager assured him that all safety concerns were taken seriously and that appropriate precautions were in place. Yet not a single change was made. The beaches remained open, guests poured in. The final alert came less than 24 hours before tragedy. On the morning of August 14th, Captain Roberto Mendez, the veteran fisherman, radioed the Coast Guard. "I've got a massive great white shadowing my boat," he reported. "Half a mile offshore, heading straight toward Pacific Coast Beach. This thing is enormous, maybe 25 feet, and there are people in the water." The Coast Guard logged the message and attempted to reach the resort. The call went unanswered. By the time anyone responded, it no longer mattered. In the aftermath, investigators discovered a trail of missed opportunities. More than a dozen warnings had been filed in the weeks leading up to the attack: reports from lifeguards, findings from marine biologists, notes from local fishermen, even observations from resort guests. Each had been dismissed as overreaction, minimized as bad optics, or buried under the weight of profit. The resort's stance was consistent: acknowledging risk meant acknowledging liability, and liability threatened revenue. The morning broke flawless, the kind of day that resorts advertise in glossy brochures. The horizon glowed gold under the rising sun, turquoise light spilling across calm seas. Gentle waves brushed the shoreline, welcoming the first families of the day. By 7 o'clock, umbrellas were planted and surfboards carried toward the waterline. To the casual observer, paradise was open for business. Ellen Shaw arrived before dawn, as she often did. 6 o'clock sharp, 2 hours ahead of her official shift. Her routine never changed. Check the tide charts, note the weather conditions, scan the waterline for irregularities. That morning, everything appeared nearly perfect: calm seas, light offshore winds, incoming tide. But she saw what others could not. The water looked darker, tinted with a strange depth. And the absence of dolphins or seals on such a clear morning gnawed at her instincts. She logged her concerns over the radio: unusual water conditions, no marine life visible, recommend caution protocols. The response from the resort was immediate and dismissive. "Ellen, it's a beautiful day. Guests are ready for the water. Let's focus on providing a great experience. No protocols were changed. No warnings were issued to swimmers. By 9 o'clock, the beach was crowded, children, splashing couples, waiting surfboards, stacked along the waterline. The sea, alive with human presence, appeared deceptively harmless. From her elevated platform, Ellen kept her binoculars fixed on the horizon. Maria Santos manned the north tower, Carlos Rivera the south. The team spread across the shoreline, scanning, calling out minor warnings, pulling struggling swimmers from the current. The hours passed with routine rescues and casual smiles from tourists who never knew how close they came to disaster. For Ellen, though, the unease never lifted. Her eyes stayed on the waterline, watching, waiting for something she knew was already there. At 11:30, Ellen caught sight of something that froze her. A dark shape, massive, sliding parallel to the shoreline, just beyond the designated swim zone. She raised her binoculars, steady hands trying to pin down the blur against the shifting waves. Maria Carlos checked 200 yards straight out from Main Beach. Anything unusual, she radioed. Both lifeguards scanned. "I see something," Carlos replied. "Could be a big fish. Maybe debris. Hard to tell." But Ellen knew better. Too large for a dolphin, too direct for driftwood. Her instincts were louder than any reassurance, but without proof, she couldn't shut the water down. At 12:15, she made the call that would save dozens of lives, even as it sealed her own. She activated the beach PA system. "Attention swimmers and water sport participants, please move closer to shore. Stay within the red buoys." Some grumbled, others muttered about overcaution, but they obeyed. Within minutes, the swim zone contracted, corralling people within 50 yards of shore. Over the radio, her supervisor snapped Ellen, "Why the restriction? You're going to get complaints." Calm but firm, she replied, "Possible large marine animal in the area. Just a precaution." "Is there an actual sighting or another one of your feelings?" he pressed. Before she could answer, the water itself gave the reply. A family of 4, 2 teenagers on a bright yellow inflatable raft, had drifted outside the boundary. The current carried them further out, their parents unaware until Ellen spotted it. She grabbed her rescue board and sprinted into the surf. Paddling hard, she saw it before they did, the water around the raft churning unnaturally. Something enormous was circling beneath them. Back to shore now, she shouted, her voice sharp over the crash of waves. The family scrambled, paddling clumsily, but their raft was slow. They were still over 100 yards out when the ocean erupted. The attack began with a violent burst of water seen from every corner of the beach. A great white shark, later estimated at over 22 feet, surged upward. Witnesses gasped, but the raft wasn't its target. Instead, the predator locked onto Ellen. Her powerful strokes, the rhythmic splash of her rescue board, marked her as the immediate threat. The shark diverted from the raft and arrowed toward her. From shore, hundreds watched in horror. The shark rose from the depths, its bulk colliding with Ellen's board. The impact launched her into the air, a lifeguard thrown skyward like a rag doll. Witness Jennifer Martinez recalled, "I saw her go up high, maybe 6 feet, and then everything went red." The shark's jaws clamped down with catastrophic force. Unlike typical great white attacks that involve a strike and retreat pattern, this predator lingered at the surface, thrashing with violent intensity. The beach dissolved into pandemonium. Screams tore through the air. Parents dragged children from the surf, sprinting toward the resort buildings. Others froze in disbelief, unable to look away. Lifeguard Carlos Rivera reacted instantly, leaping onto the rescue jet ski and cutting across the water at full throttle, his emergency whistle shrill over the chaos. But as he approached, the scene grew more horrific. Rivera later testified, "It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The shark was vertical in the water, almost like it was showing her off. Ellen was limp in its jaws, blood all around. It held her there like a trophy." The predator wasn't just feeding, it was asserting dominance in front of the entire beach. Carlos Rivera maneuvered his jet ski in tight circles, angling from the side to distract the shark. For a moment, he hoped the noise and spray might force it to release Ellen. But the predator adjusted, turning deliberately toward deeper water with her still locked in its jaws. From the North Tower, Maria Santos coordinated the emergency response, her voice steady but urgent over the radio. 911 confirmed. Coast Guard en route. Estimated 20 minutes. Too long. Every second mattered, and Ellen's life was bleeding away in the surf. Santos relayed, "We need immediate medical assistance at Pacific Coast Beach Resort. Shark attack in progress. Victim still in water." Onshore resort management scrambled. General Manager David Chen ordered the evacuation of all swimming zones and rushed out every available rescue craft. But the actions came late. Panic spread faster than procedure. Families stampeded for dry sand, while others still in the water thrashed for shore, creating additional emergencies in the chaos. The family Ellen had tried to protect was still struggling on their bright yellow raft. Though shaken, they paddled furiously, inching closer to land. Other swimmers, caught between fear and exhaustion, cried for help as lifeguards juggled simultaneous rescues. What began as one predator strike had cascaded into a full-scale disaster response. Farther offshore, Captain Roberto Mendez intercepted the Mayday call on his marine radio. His 40-foot fishing vessel 3 miles away became the largest craft in range. "I pushed my engines until the gauges screamed," he later recalled. "All I thought was, don't let me be too late." As Mendez tore across the chop toward the beach, the predator maintained its grip on Ellen, circling like a shadow that refused to vanish. Then, without warning, the shark shifted behavior. After minutes of thrashing, it suddenly released her. Ellen's limp body broke the surface, her red lifeguard suit shredded and soaked in blood. Rivera seized the opening, accelerating in and hauling her across the back of his jet ski. She wasn't conscious, but she had a pulse, Rivera testified later. "I started compressions while steering for shore." The predator, however, had not departed. It circled, closing in again, forcing Rivera to ride hard in evasive arcs. Mendez arrived just in time, his fishing boat providing a broader, more stable platform. He pulled alongside Rivera and helped transfer Ellen aboard. "When I saw her, I knew we had minutes at best," Mendez said. Her torso and legs were torn, but she was breathing. "We were fighting a losing battle, and that shark was still out there circling us." He coordinated over radio with Coast Guard air support, marking his vessel's position with smoke flares as the helicopters approached. At 12:47, barely 18 minutes after the attack began, a Coast Guard helicopter thundered over the beach. Paramedics winched down and took control of Ellen's care. Her injuries were catastrophic: collapsed lung, multiple rib fractures, heavy internal bleeding. She coded twice during the short flight to Pacific Memorial Hospital. Lieutenant Sarah Williams, a paramedic on board, remembered, "We brought her back both times, but it was like sand slipping through your fingers. We couldn't stop the damage. Surgeons fought for over 6 hours to stabilize her. Blood transfusions, emergency thoracotomy, abdominal repair procedure after procedure, but the trauma was too extensive." At 7:23 that evening, August 15, 2023, Ellen Shaw was pronounced dead. News of her death spread before nightfall. By the next morning, national outlets had flooded the small resort town. Satellite trucks lined the streets, reporters demanded accountability, and parents questioned why warnings had been ignored. But even as grief spread through the community, Pacific Coast Beach Resort shifted immediately into damage control. Their message to the public would prove as tightly managed as their silence had been before the tragedy. Within an hour of the attack, the resort's legal team arrived on site. Staff were ordered not to speak with reporters. Security personnel moved through the panicked crowds, demanding phones and seizing footage. That evening, the resort released a single, tightly scripted statement. "We are deeply saddened by today's tragic incident. Our hearts go out to the family of our employee. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and will not be commenting further out of respect for the family." Behind the polished words, a different operation was unfolding. Resort management began erasing every trace that could implicate them. Ellen's daily logs detailing repeated shark sightings were deleted from internal systems. Supervisor emails dismissing her concerns disappeared. Even hard copies of marine biology reports warning of increased predator activity vanished from office files. The cover-up reached beyond the resort. The Coast Guard's communications log, which had recorded Captain Mendez's urgent shark warning, was mysteriously corrupted and unreadable. But the resort couldn't erase everything. Within days, cell phone videos began circulating online. Grainy shot from a distance, the clips still captured the enormity of the predator and the violence of the attack. Social media surged with outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForEllen and Shark Attack Cover-Up spread globally. Pressure mounted as journalists began questioning the official narrative. Former employees stepped forward, revealing a pattern of safety concerns silenced in favor of tourism profits. Ellen's colleague lifeguard Maria Santos was among the first to go public. "They're trying to make this look like a freak accident." It wasn't. Ellen had been warning about sharks for weeks. She filed report after report. They ignored every one. Her words went viral. Within 48 hours, Santos was terminated for violating her confidentiality agreement. Other employees who spoke out faced the same fate. The message from management was clear silence meant job security, truth meant unemployment, but the story was too large to contain. Investigative reporters dug into local records and uncovered the truth. The beach's old name, Blood Point, and its long record of shark incidents deliberately omitted from environmental assessments. Dr. Patricia Williams, the marine biologist who had analyzed the fish kills, also broke her silence. I submitted a report clearly warning of great white activity in the area. That report was ignored. If proper precautions had been taken, Ellen Shaw would still be alive. Legal action followed swiftly. Ellen's brother Jake Shaw filed a wrongful death suit against the resort, alleging negligence, failure to warn, and willful indifference. Standing before cameras, he stated simply, "My sister died because they cared more about profits than her safety. She tried to protect people. She tried to warn them, and they silenced her. Now they want to call it bad luck." But this wasn't luck, it was neglect. The resort responded with its full arsenal. High-powered attorneys were retained. Expert witnesses were paid to testify that shark attacks were random acts of nature, statistically unpredictable, impossible to prevent. A carefully orchestrated PR campaign reframed Ellen as a selfless hero while insisting no one bore responsibility for her death. Shark attacks are natural disasters, the narrative claimed. Tragic but beyond human control. For a time, that narrative gained traction. But then investigators uncovered one crucial oversight. In their rush to erase incriminating records, the resort's legal team had overlooked an off-site backup server. That archive contained everything: Ellen's deleted shark sighting, logs her supervisors' dismissive emails, and the ignored marine biology reports. It was the evidence that shifted the case and the story irreversibly. The recovered backup files contained everything. Ellen's detailed reports of shark sightings, warnings from marine biologists, communications with local authorities, and most damaging of all, internal emails proving resort management knew the risks yet chose to suppress them. The cover-up had collapsed. The truth was coming out whether the resort wanted it or not. Ellen Shaw's death was not an isolated event. As investigators widened their scope, a disturbing national pattern emerged. Resort after resort, tragedy after tragedy. The responses followed the same script. Warnings were raised, ignored, and buried. Victims were rebranded as tragic heroes of unforeseeable accidents. Management denied responsibility, sanitized records, and quietly resumed business. In 2019, surfer Tommy Rodriguez was killed by a great white off Coral Bay resort in California. Marine biologists had been flagging increased predator activity for months. Management ignored them. The tragedy was portrayed as unavoidable. In 2020, swimmer Lisa Chen vanished during a dawn swim at Ocean View Resort in North Carolina. Witnesses saw a large shark circling the area. The resort insisted she was lost to a rip current despite evidence suggesting otherwise. In 2021, lifeguard Marcus Johnson was mauled while attempting a rescue at Seaside Resort in South Carolina. He survived, but the injuries left him permanently disabled. The case was quietly settled through the resort's insurance with a non-disclosure agreement ensuring Johnson could never speak publicly. The pattern was identical across all cases. Resorts issued polished sympathy statements, denied liability, and then buried evidence. Expensive attorneys controlled the courtroom narrative. Public relations firms controlled the media coverage. Whistleblowers were silenced with legal threats or payouts. It was an industry playbook: protect profit, limit exposure, move forward. But Ellen Shaw's death refused to disappear. Her brother Jake Shaw refused to be silenced. Channeling his sister's relentless drive, he built a coalition of attorneys who specialized in corporate negligence, marine biologists willing to testify, and investigative journalists intent on exposing the truth. The case cracked open when David Park, a former resort employee, stepped forward. Fired for questioning safety protocols, Park had preserved copies of internal documents before leaving. Among them were executive emails outlining how management discussed containing the shark issue without compromising business. One email, dated just days before Ellen's attack, carried the most weight. From resort general manager David Chen: "We need to be very careful about how we handle these shark reports. Any public acknowledgement could hurt occupancy rates. Focus on maintaining confidence. Safety messaging can be adjusted, but closures are not an option." The words left little doubt. Profits had been placed above human lives, and Ellen Shaw had paid the price. The internal emails left no ambiguity. Any official acknowledgement of danger could expose us to liability and damage our reputation. Keep this information internal. Avoid creating panic. Another thread revealed that during the resort's development, executives had been fully aware of the coastline's history as blood point. They had proceeded anyway, calculating that economic gain outweighed environmental risk. For marine biologist Dr. Michael Torres, the evidence was vindication. He had warned of predator migration patterns and rising shark activity months earlier. They knew the danger was real, he told the court. They chose to ignore it. Ellen Shaw died because profit was prioritized over human life. The legal case grew into a global media spectacle, with reporters crowding the small coastal town each morning of the trial. The prosecution's witnesses methodically dismantled the resort's defense. Captain Roberto Mendez, the veteran fisherman, delivered one of the most damning accounts. I radioed that morning about a 25-foot great white heading straight for the beach. I told them people were in danger. If they had cleared the water for 30 minutes, Ellen Shaw would be alive. His logs entered into evidence confirmed his transmission at 11:02 a.m., 43 minutes before the attack. The courtroom fell silent as the audio recording was played. Mendez's urgent voice crackling Coast Guard. This is fishing vessel Maria Elena. I have a 25-foot great white shark approximately half a mile from Pacific Coast Beach Resort heading inshore. There are swimmers in the water. Please advise. The timestamp confirmed the chilling fact: 43 minutes of ignored warning. Enough time to clear the water. Enough time to save a life. Dr. Patricia Williams testified next. She presented photographs of mutilated fish carcasses she had examined weeks earlier, their bodies torn with crescent bite marks. These weren't isolated kills, she explained. They showed a consistent pattern of feeding behavior by a large predator establishing residency in the area. Her original report, buried by resort management, was entered into evidence for the jury to see. Former employee David Park then took the stand. Fired for questioning safety procedures, Park revealed the practice of daily beach beautification. His orders were to remove carcasses of large fish before guests arrived. Management wanted no evidence of sharks on display. They told us, flat out talk about it and you lose your job. His testimony painted a clear picture of deliberate concealment. The resort's defense, led by prominent attorney Richard Sterling, tried to spin the attack as an act of nature. Expert witnesses testified that shark behavior was inherently unpredictable and impossible to control. But under cross-examination, their credibility unraveled. The prosecution revealed that Sterling's experts had been paid over $200,000 each for their testimony, and several had long-standing financial ties to the resort industry. The decisive moment came when lifeguard Carlos Rivera took the stand. Fired and threatened with legal action, he testified anyway. Ellen knew something was wrong. She warned them again and again. They told her to stop making trouble and just keep guests happy. She died protecting people while management worried about profits. Maria Santos followed, confirming the suppression tactics. They offered me $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement, she testified. They wanted me to say Ellen acted recklessly, that she ignored safety protocols. I refused because it wasn't true. Her words, like Rivera's, hit with weight the defense could not shake. Maria Santos had refused a payout to lie. I wouldn't dishonor my friend's death for any amount of money, she said firmly. But the prosecution's most powerful witness was Ellen's mother, Margaret Shaw. On the stand, she opened her daughter's journal and read entries aloud. July 28th. Saw another large shadow today. Definitely predatory behavior. Tried to talk to Mark about increasing safety protocols, but he said I was paranoid. I know what I saw. I know these waters. Something is wrong, and I'm scared that someone is going to get hurt. The entry was dated just 18 days before Ellen's death. The courtroom remained silent as Margaret continued each page, showing her daughter's rising fear and management's continued dismissal. The defense argued that Ellen's death was a tragic accident. They claimed the resort followed regulations and could not predict shark behavior. Ocean risks, they said, were simply part of the environment. But prosecutor Jennifer Walsh dismantled that claim. Standing before the jury, she laid out the timeline. Fish kills ignored biologists, silenced fishermen, disregarded lifeguard reports deleted. Ladies and gentlemen, she concluded this was not an act of nature. This was corporate negligence. They knew the risk. They knew lives were at stake. They chose profit over protection. And Ellen Shaw paid with her life. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Their decision, $15 million in damages against the resort. But the number was secondary. What mattered was exposure. The trial had cracked open and industry-wide pattern warnings. Buried victims reframed as accidents silenced. Enforced to preserve profit, the ruling sparked calls for reform. Regulations were introduced requiring resorts to disclose known marine hazards. Emergency protocols were upgraded. Warning systems were expanded. Yet advocates warned that the deeper problem persisted. Oversight was weak, enforcement underfunded, and the industry continued to prioritize reputation over safety. Ellen's case had forced change, but not enough to stop the next preventable tragedy. Jake Shaw refused to let his sister's name fade. He founded the Ellen Shaw Foundation, dedicated to marine safety, public education, and supporting families who lost loved ones in preventable incidents. Its mission statement was simple: no one should die because those in power chose silence over safety. The foundation pressed for stronger laws, supported whistleblowers, and built resources for communities living with ocean risks. But Jake acknowledged their work was far from finished. Each summer, new resorts opened along dangerous coastlines. Each year, new warnings were ignored. The same pattern repeated: profits above people, of public relations above public welfare. The story of Ellen Shaw was not only about a single lifeguard on a single day. It was about a system where truth was buried, risk was concealed, and silence was rewarded. Until that system changes, more heroes like Ellen Shaw will die protecting others from dangers that could have been prevented. Her death stands as a warning: when danger is ignored, when truth-tellers are silenced, when profit outweighs protection, tragedy is inevitable. Ellen Shaw died doing what she had always done, protecting lives. The question now is whether her sacrifice will push us to demand lasting change, or whether the cycle of silence will continue until another family buries their hero. The choice, like the ocean itself, is vast and unforgiving. But unlike the ocean, it is one we can control. You've been watching Animal Ambush and Encounters, where we uncover the stories that others try to bury. If you believe silence should never cost another life, subscribe, like, and share to keep these stories alive. Because silence isn't just complicity, it's deadly.